No.
Quindi un budget sempre lo stesso che tutti fanno questa estensione.
Ascoltato queste cose.
Significa che esatto. Ah, sì,
C'è il passaggio di me.
so che
Adesso le porto per l'altro. Non so se qui prima di fare questo.
Arriva domani?
Partecipa se stesso. Sì. Okay, maybe we can start. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce you Paloma Atencia Linares from the Universidad Nacional de Educación a Distancia in Madrid. Paloma is, I would translate it as assistant professor, but I'm not sure. Profesora ayudante doctor.
Well, actually, contratada doctora. No.
So at the Department of Logic, History and Philosophy of Science at UNED, and I think that Paloma does not need any introduction. Anyone knows in the field of aesthetics and doesn't mind that she is one of the editors, along with Derek Matravers, of the British Journal of Aesthetics. Photography is actually one of her main field of research. She has recently published various papers on those topics that are probably related to what she will talk to us today. One that came out in the British Journal of Aesthetics in 2018 for Arts of Photography, an essay in philosophy, and another one that came out early in 2012 on the Journal of Aesthetics and Art Criticism, Fiction, Non-Fiction, and Deceptive Photographic Representation. But she also works on a very sexy topic nowadays, which is deepfake.
Yes, that has also been published.
Right, well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, the paper that just came out last year on Synthèse, Deepfake, Shallow Epistemic Grace on the Epistemic Robustness of Photography and Videos in the Era of Deepfakes. Today she is talking to us about how to understand fiction in photography.
Thanks so much. Buon pomeriggio, grazie mille per l'invito. Scusatemi, ma non parlo italiano, so I'm going to continue in English. So I'm going to talk about fiction in photography, but there are a lot of ways in which we can use the notion of fiction in general and in photography in particular. So I'm just going to go through some ways in which we can use this notion. So, we can use the notion of fiction in the sense that Walton talks about fiction. And if we use fiction in this sense, we would be talking about fiction in a way that it's equivalent to an idiosyncratic notion of representation. So what Walton wants to capture with the notion of fiction when applied to pictures is something about the nature of pictorial representation, and that it opposes to direct perception. So what he calls fictional is fictional seeing through pictures. So if we use this notion of fiction as applied to pictorial representations, what we are going to have is that all pictorial representations, including photographs, are going to count as fiction. That's not something that I'm going to be talking about, but just keep in mind that this is not what I'm talking about. So another way in which we can talk about fiction in general and in photography in particular is something that we can call fiction in the object sense. If we use this notion of fiction, we would be talking about something related to fictional reference. So here the idea is that is a reference or a representation to objects that do not exist. So pictures that represent things that are not existent. So the relevant contrast here is between pictures that represent objects that exist versus pictures that represent things that exist. Here, along this dimension of fiction is where most or everything that has been written on fiction in photography is set. So this debate about the fictional competence of photographs, whether photographs can actually represent fictional entities or not, is set in this dimension of fiction. And this is not something that I'm going to be talking about. I have published on this, but this is today I'm not going to be talking about. There's another sense of fiction, which we can call fiction in the word sense. And this sense of fiction tries to capture what classificatory practices or what critical practices try to capture when they distinguish between works of fiction and works of nonfiction. And most of what has been written about this distinction is on literature and film. But today I want to focus on this dimension of fiction, what a distinction between works of fiction and works of nonfiction as applied to photography. Now, notice that in contemporary philosophical work regarding fiction in this dimension, when applied to literature and film, it's widely recognized that this sense of fiction, fiction in the word sense, is different from fiction in the object sense. So, for example, if we have a biography of Walt Disney or a documentary on Walt Disney, there's going to be reference to fictional objects all the time. So reference to Mickey Mouse, reference to Donald Duck. But the fact that there is a reference to a fictional character doesn't mean that the work itself is a fictional work. So the work is still nonfiction, even though if there is reference to fictional entities. So if this is the case in literature and film, and it's widely recognized that this is the case, we don't have to assume that in photographs this is going to be different. That is, we don't have to assume that just because a photograph represents a fictional object is thereby a fictional work of photography. So these two things are different. Okay, so notice also that when applied to literature and film, philosophical investigation around this dimension of fiction in the word sense, the philosophical investigation tries to account for well-established classificatory practices that are in place. So in literature and in film, we have a very clear idea of the extension of works that theories must capture. So we all have a clear idea of what fictional works of literature are. We know what fictional works of film are. So, I mean, that's the extension that theories have to capture is clear. But I don't think this is the case in photography. Our intuitions regarding what counts as a fictional work, again, as opposed to what counts as photographs that purport to represent fictional objects, I think are messier. And we cannot just assume that our theories of fictions designed to account for fictional works in one media, or for example, in literature and film, are going to work equally well for works in other media, such as photography, right? So let me see. So a preliminary aim of this talk is to answer these two questions. Does the distinction between fiction and nonfiction in the word sense, in this dimension of fiction, apply to photographic works in any informative sense? And if it does these categories behave in a similar way in photography than in other media, such as literature and film? And in order to answer these questions, I'm going to use a specific theory of fiction with a clear methodology. And I think I'm going to use this theory of fiction because I think it provides a methodology that is neutral, that is, it neither presupposes nor departs from a given classificatory practice in certain mediums. So that's one advantage of the theory. However, I'm not going to offer a comprehensive defense of the genre theory of fiction against competing theories. I'm going to say something about this at the end of the talk, but I'm not going to offer a comprehensive defense. If you want a defense for this, you can go and read Stacy Friend's work. She does a very good job of defending her theory. But the application of the theory works in the case of photography as I think it does. If this analysis is informative, I think this will speak in favor of the genre theory of fiction, and it also, of course, is going to help us to clarify the category of fiction in photography in a way I think that it's consistent with the appreciative practices in this medium. So, okay, so let me start by giving you the basics of the genre theory of fiction. Okay, so According to the genre theory of fiction, as put forward by Stacey Friend, fiction and nonfiction are genres or appreciative kinds. That is, fiction and nonfiction do not capture natural kinds. This is not a metaphysical or an epistemic distinction. This is a distinction that is grounded in our practices of understanding and appreciating representational works. So according to the theory, genres have to be understood as Waltonian categories of art. That is, these are ways of classifying works according to their standard, contrast-standard, and variable features. And these genres or categories are going to guide our appreciation of works that are classified in them. So the idea is that standard features internal to the work, together with metacategorical features, such as things as the work's origin, the authorial intentions, etc., are going to contribute to place the work in a category, okay? So the idea is that no feature, internal or metacategorical, is going to be substantially necessary or sufficient for a work to be classified as fiction. But as a rule of thumb, a work cannot be fiction unless first it possesses at least some standard features of fiction and meets at least one metacategorical criteria. Okay, everything so far it's a bit too general and abstract, but hopefully it will become a bit clearer in what follows. So something that is very nice about this theory is that the framework of the theory allows that fiction and nonfiction can be genres in some media, but not in others. So, and this is because these genres may play a role in the evaluation of works and appreciative practices in certain medium, but not in others. So, for example, the villanelle is a genre that is active in poetry, right? But it doesn't occur in other media. If I try to appreciate a film, and I tell you this film is a villanelle, you wouldn't know what to do with that. I mean, that's not going to guide your appreciation. So this is a genre that is active in poetry, but it's not active in cinema because it doesn't guide your appreciation. It doesn't help you or it doesn't inform you to appreciate the work. So a relevant question then to us is whether fiction and nonfiction are actually active genres in photography. And the genre theory of fiction provides us with a clear methodology to answer this question. There are two things that we have to do to see whether these genres are active in the medium of photography. First, we have to find the correct criteria for classification, okay? So there should be a practice of classifying works in that medium that so that we can identify a set of robust set of internal features, standard and contrast-standard features of the works that are classified in this practice. And also we have to find metacategorical features. So for example, established practices in the community of classifying works in that genre or classificatory intentions on the part of authors, that has to be in place. And secondly, we have to see whether the category actually plays a role in appreciation. So we are going to, so what I'm going to do is to see whether we can find these two things in the medium of photography. So let's start with the category of nonfiction in photography, which I think is pretty straightforward. So we can see how the theory works in nonfiction. So I think it's safe to say that, and uncontroversially, I think, that it's safe to say that there's nonfiction in photography. Okay. First, we can identify established practices associated with nonfiction in the medium, such as documentary photography, photojournalism, scientific photography, travel photography, or what have you. So there are established practices that we can associate with nonfiction. Also, authors who produce works in this category normally have the intention that the photographs are understood or judged against other non-fictional photographs. So here we have the metacategorical features in place, okay? And also we can also identify a relatively robust set of internal features that we can identify as being standard and contrast-standard of the category. For example, here's a list. It's not exhaustive, but it gives you an idea. So typical works of photography that are non-fictional have these features. So typically they have factual content, things that actually happen. It's a veridical representation, so the representation actually depicts things as they were. They normally have a realistic or naturalistic style. The content is put forward as being the case or intended to be believed. The objectivity is normally a constraint of this practice. There's little or not manipulation. The lighting is typically natural, not artificial. And we have also contrast-standard features, things that we typically don't find in works of nonfiction in photography. So we don't find normally actors in photographs that are non-fictional. There's typically not staging. There's typically not imaginary scenarios. There's typically, again, not sophisticated pre and post-production. These photographs don't use studio staging. So these are standard features and contra-standard features of the category of nonfiction in photography. So it seems that the theory provides a correct criteria for classification. So for example, the theory would predict that Walker-Evans, this photograph by Walker-Evans is nonfiction. Why? Well, because first, it possesses various standard features of the category. So it depicts a factual scene. It's an ordinary life scene that happened. The style is realistic. The depicted subjects are not actors. There's no artificial lighting, etc. But also we have metacategorical features of the category. So photographs were part of a book with factual content that was classified as nonfiction, and the photograph was intended to be part of an assignment of Fortune magazine, which is a non-fictional publication. The theory, notice that the theory also can account for problematic cases of nonfiction, or for example, defective factual photography. So this is a photograph that was published in 2003 that was incredibly controversial. It was published in a newspaper, and this was the photo that was published. The problem is that this was a composite photograph. This event happened, but not as depicted. So it was a composite photograph between these two pictures, and of course, none of these pictures was expressive enough. So what the photographer did was to mix the two things, and this was published. So the theory would tell you this is a non-fictional photography, although it's defective. So why is this so? Well, it's non-fiction because first it possesses various standard features of the category. It depicts a factual scene. I mean, something that happens, although it's not veridical. It didn't picture how actually things happen. The style is realistic. It's the depicted subjects are not actors. There's no sign of artificial lighting. So, there are a lot of standard features of the category. Also, metacategorical features. It was published in a newspaper. It was intended to be part of a factual piece of information, and it was meant to be judged as factual. So it was presented for you to believe that this happened. Right? However, the theory also captures why the photograph was problematic. Well, because it presents a lot of also contra-standard features of the category that defy your expectations of the genre. Mainly, it has manipulation. So this is something that strikes you as odd. So basically, the theory predicts well that it's non-fiction, but it's a defective case. Okay. Now, what happens with fiction? This is a bit perhaps more controversial because first, as I said before, we don't have clear intuitions with respect to what kind of photographs fall in this category. First, because when prompted to pick works of photography that we would classify as fiction, many people would probably think about just photographs that involve manipulation or that don't fit into the genre of photography, right? So, maybe if you think about fictional photography, maybe you'll think that, well, since these photographs don't fit in the documentary category and they involve some kind of manipulation, maybe they count as fiction. But this does not show, just because people can think about these photographs as being fictional, this doesn't mean that this set of works actually are an appreciative category in photography, or that such category actually plays a critical role in the medium. In fact, these works are not typically grouped together as an appreciative category, right? They are never referred, first, you never see them referred to as fictional photography. I mean, here you have, they are placed in different categories. These are surreal photography, and people never talk about, maybe they have an element that you can associate a fictional element, but they are never, you never see, for example, an exhibition of surreal photography with funny photographs that people just produce for fun, or together with caricatures, right? I mean, these are different, very different appreciative practices. They are not referred to as fictional. So these, I mean, even if you may think that these photographs are fictional, just because if I ask you, maybe you're prompted to pick them up. But these are not an appreciative category. They are never appreciated together or as a contrast class. So, you may think, or a skeptic can think, that if the label of fiction is not frequently used when we classify photographs, probably this is because there is no practice of fiction in the medium. This could be the case. I mean, we don't use a label, we use other types of labels, and photographs are classified into different sort of ways, but maybe the fact that we don't use the label frequently, it's because there is no practice of fiction in photography. And of course, if there is no established practice of fiction in photography, how do we know which features are standard, contrast-standard, and variable features in this practice? Okay, so I think actually there is indeed an established practice of fiction in photography, although it's relatively recent and it's very delimited, right? There is actually a tradition in photographic works whose content and style are continuous with the practice of fiction in other media. Works in this tradition are not simply works that do not fit into the non-fictional category. And also, fictional photography is not every photographic work that is just unrealistic or that involves manipulation. These works, photographic works of fiction, are works that are intentionally and explicitly drawn from, or inspired by fictional literature or films. Okay, so these are the set of works that are actually works of fiction in photography. So here you can see the influence from cinema and from literature. Here, this is called Ophelia, for example. This refers directly to Alice in Wonderland. Here, Cindy Sherman. I mean, clearly it's called film still. Jeff Wall also has a set of photographs that mimic social realism in film. And of course, here we have a direct reference to filmic superheroes. So with this set of works in mind, we can actually see what features are standard of the category. So for example, one significant feature is that works in photographic fiction have literary or cinematic themes or clear stories that resemble filmic stories. Or they have literary references. There's sophisticated pre and post production, as there is in film. There's use of actors or impersonation. There's staging or made up situations. There's an element of performance. Typically they have imaginative stories, and the type of shots are characteristic of fictional films, for example. Okay, so not only we have standard and counter-standard features, but also we see some metacategorical features, such as the fact that critics actually use the label of fiction to refer to this very delimited and clear set of works. So here, I mean, I'm not going to read them all, but here's just a sample of critical practices where, the works by Cindy Sherman, Gregory Crudson, on a scale are referred to in critical practices as fictional photographs or fictional photographs. Or fictional worlds, etc. So we have metacategorical features in place as well. So there seem to be a robust set of internal standard and counter-standard features, and also we have metacategorical features to identify the categories of fiction and non-fiction in photography. However, this does not yet show that fiction and non-fiction are actually genres in the sense of the genre theory of fiction. Why? Well, because we need to do the second thing of the methodology. We have to show that these two categories actually play a role in the appreciation of photographic works. And in order to do that, we have to put into place the change of category test that Stacy Friend suggests following Walton. And of course, this the idea is that in order to know whether a category has an effect in appreciation, we can run this test, and certain things are going to be more salient and others are going to be, I don't know, surprising, for example, if they are contrastandard. So let's take this test. Okay. So take, for example, this photograph entitled Dead Troop Talk, a vision after an ambush of a Red Army patrol near Mokur, Afghanistan in the winter 1986. Now, if we see this work as a non-fictional work, will probably recognize the subject matter as standard of the category. Okay, so war scenes are standard in nonfiction or in documentary photography, and we'll also probably assume that the people depicted are actual real soldiers of the Red Army patrol. And we'll probably also assume that the events actually took place in Afghanistan in the winter of 1980-86, because that's normally there is a coherence between the title and the image in non-fictional works. Now, paying attention to the details, we'll probably be led to assess this photograph negatively. Because look, I mean, if you look at the details, suddenly you see an exaggerated expression of disgust, and the soldier is signaling his wounds. So that's odd. I mean, this is like, why is this so artificial? And look at this other image. We see this soldier like extremely pale, and he seemed to be posing. So when we see this picture, we see this detail, probably we'll be led to assess this photograph negatively. We'll say, well, you know, this is a very bad non-fictional film, non-fictional photograph. It seems staged, artificial, inauthentic, and stilted, right? Now, try now to perceive this photograph as a work of fiction. If we perceive this photograph as a work of fiction, we will probably assume from the outset that this is a staged scene. The soldiers that we see in the shot are probably actors, we'll think, and the scene may be a reenactment, but it needn't be. All these are standard features of the category of fiction, so they don't surprise us. Okay, in fact, we sort of expect them to be so. We won't take the theatricalization or the artificiality as a problem. In fact, the exaggeration is probably intended, we'll think, and therefore blameless, right? The photograph we may conclude, if we look at it as a fiction, that it's just, you know, maybe it's a parody of the nonsense of war. So we'll be led to conclude, if we perceive this work as fiction, as, you know, this photograph is skillful, imaginative, it's subtle, and perhaps even smart, right? So the idea is that if this is so, different reactions to the same photograph, depending on how we label it, support the claim that the categories of fiction and nonfiction do affect our appreciation of these works in photography. And since this is the case, and we also have a robust criteria for classification, this is what we did before, it seems that we can say that fiction and nonfiction are actually active genres in the medium. Now, I will suggest, however, that fiction and nonfiction it's a distinction that behaves slightly different in photography than in other mediums. So in Stacy Friend's application of the genre theory to the case of literature, what we get is a picture in which fiction and nonfiction are both overarching genres with different subgenres, okay? Now, and while the label may suggest that this is so, there is no leading genre and a complementary genre. Because fiction and nonfiction, even despite the labels, they have their own standard and counter-standard features that are, so fiction is not everything that is nonfiction, but the fiction has their own independent standard and counter-standard features, and nonfiction as well. So what happens is that we have the standard features and the two genres with standard and counter-standard features. Here the standard features are the green and the orange ones, and then we have subgenres within each category, and each subgenre has their own standard features, right? Here is signaled with different colors, but the idea is that all the subgenres are going to inherit substantial parts of the standard features of the overall supergenre or the overall category. So here, that's why. So they have their own standard features that are different from each other, but they inherit a substantial part, a robust set of standard features from the overall category here as well. Okay. Now, I think that this is not the case in photography. I think that in photography, there is what we can call the factual genre, what would be equivalent to nonfiction. And this is a very comprehensive and all-encompassing and homogeneous genre. And there is a robust set of standard features and metacategorical features that are shared by all the subgenres, even if the subgenres have their own specific standard features as well. However, the fictional genre is rather restricted, and substantially different from other non-factual photographic genres. Okay? So, photographic traditions such as pictorialism, Dada, surrealism, caricature, abstraction are certainly non-factual photography. They are, in many cases, intentional reactions against just realist and factual or documentary tradition, right? So all of them are non-factual. But they don't fit well into the category of fiction as I propose we should conceive it in photography. Pictorialism, for example, which is probably the closest genre to fiction, pictorialist photography does not seem to share the standard features of fictional photography. There is no explicit reference to cinematic style and sophisticated pre-production, for example, and although the subjects depicted are depicted normally adopting expressive poses, we don't normally find the presence of actors and impersonation in pictorialist photography. Similarly, although the content or the subject matter of pictorialist photographs is frequently expressive or evocative of emotions, we cannot speak of a specifically made-up content or a story that is narrated by these pictures. So, in fact, most scenes in pictorialist photography are depicted, and individuals are depicted as real subjects, and they are intended to be perceived as such. And the same thing happens in the case of caricature. So caricature or photographic distortion is similar in this respect. We would certainly be reluctant to classify these pictures as factual or nonfiction, that's for sure. But they don't belong into the fictional genre either. Although caricatures certainly depict their content in a non-veridical way, they don't necessarily have non-factual content. In fact, it's rather standard to depict people and things that actually exist, and they are recognized as such. Photographic caricature very rarely show actors performing or impersonating other people, and there's normally no staging. Okay? Similarly, we don't find other standard features of fiction, such as imaginative narrative or sophisticated pre-production. And I cannot go through all the different subgenres of non-factual photography, but the point is similar. Even though all of them are non-factual photography, the standard features are completely different from those of fiction. Now, the idea is that there are a variety of photographic practices that are not part of the factual genre, but that do not fit well in the category of fiction either. So the idea is that non-factual photographic practices are rather heterogeneous. Distinctive standard features are just not shared among various non-factual practices. Okay? Different practices are also produced with very different categorical intentions. And you can say, well, this is similar in the case of factual photography. We have a lot of subgenres. Why are they, more homogeneous? Well, I don't think this is the case. I mean, although there are many different types of factual photography, photojournalism, scientific photography, sports photography, family photography, vernacular photography, street photography, what have you. All of them are different types of factual photography. And of course, they have their specific standard features. They are not as heterogeneous as the non-factual photographic genres. Okay? I mean, again, I cannot go through all the subgenres here, but if you go through them, through these photographs, you will find that most of them share a very robust set of standard features. Okay? This is not exhaustive, and of course, there are going to be standard features that are going to be different in each of these categories. But the point is that in all these categories, for example, objectivity is important in many genres. Normally, they have factual content. You have factual content in photojournalism, ethnographic photography, medical photography, sports photography. All of them focus on factual content. Typically, there is veridical representation. Typically, they have a realistic style. The content is put forward as being the case, etc. I mean, I cannot go through all of them, but the point is that they all share a substantial set of standard features that even though that they are different subgenres, they do share something substantial in common. So for this reason, I think that in photography, it is more appropriate to talk about two complementary genres, factual and non-factual. The category of factual photography is indeed a genre which is comprehensive and relatively homogeneous, and the set of standard features of the category are inherited by the subgenres. The non-factual category, however, is not a genre in the relevant sense. It is just an umbrella term or category that we can use to name a variety of rather heterogeneous and independent genres that do not belong to the factual genre. There might be some standard features that the non-factual genres inherit, perhaps the rejection of realism, but this alone is insufficient to inform and guide our appreciation of all these genres. Non-factual photography is, in this sense, not equivalent to fiction. Fiction in photography is indeed a genre. Here we have it, but it's one among those different and independent genres that we can classify together, as using a practical term as non-factual. But non-factual photography is not a genre, it's just an umbrella term. Why? Well, because these are very heterogeneous genres. Okay, so now I'm going to suggest that the peculiarities of the genres in photography, the fact that the relevant complementary genres in this medium are factual and non-factual, and the fact that the factual genre is in a way the leading or the basic genre or I don't like the label leading genre, but in a way more homogeneous genre. It's not unrelated to the nature of the medium. I mean, given the nature of the medium, in a way, standard features of factual photography come for free or somehow by default. Okay? Why? Well, first, the photographic mechanism, as many people, philosophers in the literature have talked about, the photographic mechanism is designed in a way to capture veridical images of real existing objects. Of course, this the mechanism doesn't prevent there to be photographs that are manipulated or that the genre depicts fictional entities. Of course, that's not the case. But in a way, it makes the mechanism makes it much easier to obtain a photograph that is veridical than to obtain one that depicts a fictional object or a non-veridical scene. Also, it's frequently mentioned in the literature that photography has a peculiar phenomenology. It's a very realistic medium. So in a way, the realistic style that is a standard feature of factual photography in a way comes for free, comes with the medium. Okay. Also, it's frequent to see in the literature to read that photography has certain epistemic advantage or is perceived as a specific epistemically advantageous medium compared to other pictorial kinds. So in a way, these presuppose viewers to believe that the things they see in photographs actually exist in the world, and it's not surprising that photographs are therefore typically used to show factual content, which is again a standard feature of factual photography. Okay, so just to summarize what I have said so far. So fiction and non-fiction are active genres in photography. Why? Well, because we can identify a robust set of features that predict the correct classification, and these categories matter for appreciation, as shown by the change of category test. So this is established. Now, I have also claimed that fiction and non-fiction behave differently in photography compared to literature and film. In photography, I have claimed that it's more appropriate to talk about factual and non-factual photography. Factual photography is an overarching, more homogeneous genre with various subgenres. But non-factual photography is not a genre in and of itself, but it's just an umbrella term that we can use to name a variety of rather heterogeneous and independent genres that do not belong to the factual genre. And fiction is just one among the different non-factual genres. So non-factual photography is not equivalent to fictional photography. Okay, and also I conjecture that the fact that factual photography is a leading genre might not be unrelated to the nature of the medium. Okay, now what I want to do to end the talk is just to give you some advantages of the genre theory of fiction as opposed to other theories of fiction. Okay, so I have claimed that, if all what I have said so far is sound, the genre theory of fiction provides a straightforward methodology to answer the questions posed at the beginning. Okay, is there fiction in photography? Yes, fiction is an active genre in photography. Why? Well, because we use the methodology and it worked well. And if there is, does the category behave in a similar way to other media? No, I said why, and also I did this applying the methodology of the genre theory of fiction. And the picture we obtain, I think, fits well with our intuition of the critical practices. So we didn't impose a notion of a preconceived notion of fiction and apply it to photography, but we actually saw how the practices are in photography, and using the methodology, we predicted the correct classification. So it seems that the genre theory of fiction provides a nice framework to explain the peculiarities of the genre in photography. Now, if we used other theories of fiction, it's not clear which methodology we should apply. Presumably, what we have to do is take the theories that they normally provide necessary and sufficient conditions, and see if the definition, if there are works of photography that fit these two necessary and sufficient conditions that the alternative theories provide. So most influential theories of fiction, as you may know, are those that claim that fiction is characterized by a specific speech act, the fictive utterance. So according to these theories, works of fiction are typically those that invite the audience to imagine or make believe the content. And depending on the theory, we'll have an extra condition, right? So let's see how this will work in photography. Let's try to see if this predict the correct classification. I'm going to claim that if we apply these theories, we're not going to get a satisfactory result. I mean, there are many theories of fiction. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to apply 3 of them. But if you want to discuss other theories, we can do that in the Q&A. So let's begin by Curry's theory of fiction, which is meant, by the way, to be applicable to depicted works. So according to this theory, a work of fiction is a work is fiction if and only if, first, if it's the product of a fictive intent, that is, there is an invitation to imagine the content, and if what we imagine is true, then it's at most accidentally true. So let's see which works of photography would be classified as fiction according to this view. Okay, if we use this theory will predict that this work by Elliot Erwitt is fiction. Why? Well, because, let me explain it. So, I mean, given the content of production of this picture by Elliot Erwitt, it is reasonable to think that the picture is inviting us to imagine that what is broken is not only the window, but also the child himself, right? Or that the kid is as fragile as the picture. So we are invited to imagine the content, and also this content, if it's what we are going to imagine, is not accidentally true. I mean, this is actually something that the author or the photographer is actually suggesting. It's not accidentally true. It's right. So, I mean, according to, if we apply this theory, then we're going to predict that this work is fiction. But it's definitely a work of nonfiction. This is uncontroversially a case of nonfictional photography. I mean, Elliot Erwitt is a documentary photographer. He never did fiction. I mean, he's just a street photographer. So, the theory is predicting the wrong classification. Other fictive utterance theories, such as David Davis, these are not explicitly are not meant to be applicable to depicted works, but perhaps we can use them. So according to David Davis, a work is fiction if and only if the author intends that the audience may believe the narrated events, and it's not the case that correspondence with the manner in which events actually transpired was taken by the author to be a constraint on the inclusion of the content. Okay, so if we follow this definition, these two uncontroversially fictional works by Agan Harahap will not qualify as fiction, since they do not meet the second condition. Okay, it's clear that part of the content included by the photographer in these pictures was indeed constrained by the manner in which the events actually happen. It's not a coincidence that the background of the picture are actually real things that happen in the Battle of Normandy over there, or the visit of Himmler to the concentration camps near Meek. Okay, this content was constrained by how events actually occur. Okay. Notice that, of course, we could claim that you may say, well, yes, I mean, some part of the content was constrained by how the events occurred, but not all the content. Well, notice if we claim that, if we require that the overall content or that everything is depicted should be constrained by how events actually transpire, then we would have to say that the theory is not a good theory also for literature, because it would exclude historical fiction, which also contains certain things that are not actually constrained by the overall how things actually transpire. So again, this predicts wrongly that these images are going to count as non-fiction, and they are clearly fictional, right? The third theory of fiction, I'm going to stop here because otherwise, there's Garcia Carpintero's view, there is Catherine Abel theory as well. And I also think that none of them work, but I'm just going to give you another example, and that's it, okay? So according to Kathleen's talk, roughly, proposition is fictional if and only if there is a prescription for a subject to imagine that proposition, and either the subject does not believe the proposition, or the subject is disposed to connect that proposition to at least one thought cue that one does not believe. Now, again, if we follow stock definition, this photograph, again by Elliot Erwin, would also qualify as fiction, since presumably it prescribes us to imagine that there is a man with a dog face, okay? But we certainly don't come to believe that the man actually has a dog face, right? And the photographer never intended us to believe that that there is a man actually in the world with a dog face. It's just, an ironic photography. And yet, this is actually, uncontroversially, I think, a case of non-fictional photographic work. Okay, this is a typical photograph by Elliot Erwin, who is a documentary photographer who documents the irony of everyday life in New York. Okay, so the theory would predict that this is a fictional photograph, and it's actually not. Okay, so I think that theories of fiction then allow us to make more fine-grained distinction between fictional photography and other non-factual photographic genres. So here, for example, if we follow standard theories of fiction, what we get is that photographs such as these three that are normally categorized as Dada, caricature, and pictorialist photography would fall into the category of fiction, because technically they fulfill the necessary and sufficient conditions. So they all invite us to imagine certain content, and they do not depict something that is actually the case. We're not constrained by the manner in which events were depicted, and do not ask the audience to believe the same proposition, if any, that has prescribed to imagine, right? However, as I said before, these are not typically classified as fiction in photography, in the critical practices of photography. These belong to different kind of genres. They are non-factual photographs, but they are not fictional photography. That's not how these photographs are appreciated within the critical practices in the medium. So overall, I think the genre theory of fiction seems not only to provide a better methodology to find out whether the genres are active in this medium, but it provides a nice framework to explain the peculiarities of the genres in photography. And that is all. Can I borrow a piece of paper that you didn't bring, and perhaps a pen? Sorry, I should have brought
mine.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Paloma. Let's see whether there are first questions from Carol, then Elvira, Fabrizio. Let me see whether, for the time being, there are no online people that want to. So please.
Okay, so thank you very much for this fantastic talk. I have a very nice question just to start. What's the role in your account of perspective in photography? Because it seems that in this connection, in this opposition between factual and non-factual photography, an important role usually is the one played by the perspective adopted by the photographer in order to make people understand, not to imagine, but to understand that photography in a specific way. Think about, I don't know if it is something true or not. Think about that photography of Marilyn Monroe reading Ulysses by James Joyce, okay? Usually this photography is presented as staged because it is a very difficult book, Ulysses by James Joyce, and it's quite sure that Marilyn Monroe couldn't read it during a pause in her film. But then there's also a different way of reading this very same photograph. Okay, Ulysses is maybe a book that you do not read from the first to the last page. You read just a few lines, then you close it, and that's enough for Joyce because it is the way that maybe we should read his works. And so it is not so difficult to understand that photography as an absolutely factual photography and not staged at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, so I think, well, first of all, let me go from the last part to I think that in both cases, this is factual photography. In one interpretation, it's ironic, like the dog face, like dog man with a dog face. In one is just ironic, but you have to recognize that that's for the photograph to be ironic. You have to recognize that, you know, the perspective, the author's perspective is telling you this is Marilyn Monroe, and look, I mean, this silly woman is reading this difficult book, something like that, right? And the other is just, you know, she's reading it as it should be read. So in both cases are factual. And I think that perspective is super important. I mean, perhaps it's a standard. So one standard feature of factual photography is perhaps that the content is put forward as either being the case or in the case of irony, as, you know, it's the case. I mean, so she's not acting as someone else. She's being Marilyn Monroe. So there's no present. I mean, it's a presence of an actor, but she's not impersonating anyone. She's being herself. So that's a standard feature. I mean, it's an actual person that is not impersonating any character. The perspective is putting forward for you to believe certain content or to, you know, to ironize, to have an ironic view on certain person who is actually in the world and exists. So those things, I mean, so the perspective is important in the sense that it gives you a clue of the standard features, how it's presented. In the case of fiction, it's presented in a different way than it's presented for you to imagine a story. And in this case, you don't have that. I mean, the photographer is not presenting the content to be imagined. It's just, you know, it's presenting the content as being the case, but with certain irony. So the perspective is important in the sense that it signals certain standard features of each of the categories. Okay.
So let's switch to people online. Andrea.
Thank you very much for the talk. It was really interesting. I really have a naive question because I was thinking about the case of selfies. Because selfies are generally used to show in some way our life in a social space. We are, for instance, in a particular place and we want to show this event. And so from this point of view, they have a sort of documentary role, we could say. But from another point of view, there's a great use, or we could also say a sort of narcissistic use of post-production in selfies. Photo filters, light manipulation are often at work in this kind of pictures. And particularly, we usually pose in a selfie. So I have two questions about this. First of all, selfies could be considered a form of non-factual photography. And then about the role of posing in general. Is posing a form of manipulation? Because posing establishes a difference with, for instance, documentary or scientific photography, or probably with factual photography in general. Thank you.
Thanks. This is a good case. I mean, so selfies in general, I mean, there can be, I would say that selfies can be sometimes be fictional. For example, Cindy Sherman in her Instagram, I don't know if you can see this, where's the camera? Where's the
The
camera?
camera is here.
So it's
Here.
well, if you go to the Instagram,
Oh. Okay.
I don't know. Well, Cindy Sherman, I mean, it's selfies, but I mean, being Cindy Sherman, she there's a lot of manipulation, but I mean, she clearly tells a story with. I mean, certain selfies can be fictional, but I think the genre is factual actually. But of course, there are specific standard features of the category that are, you know, they are more certain manipulations are more, I mean, for example, filters that are not overall, and these are not manipulations like the Cindy Sherman kind of manipulation, you know, those filters are typical of selfies. So this could be standard features. But I think, why do I think that in general selfies are factual photography? Well, you know, because there are a lot of standard features that they share with the overall supergenre. So they are presented as being the case. I mean, they are very narcissistic, but it's like, this is me. So this is factual content. And this is, I want you to perceive that this is a veridical content. It's not so veridical, but that's, I mean, that's allowed in a way. That's a characteristic of the subgenre that is more lenient in that sense. But it's presented as being the case, as being for you, the perspective is that, please believe that this is me. Also, you know, normally our selfie, you know, you take selfies in when you go doing sightseeing. So here it's me in this place where I have been. Typically, they have snapshot aesthetics. It's realistic, even though that they have filters, but you know, they have to show that it's you and you are in a certain place that you want to show up, right? So I think that they are factual, although it's true that that it's characteristic of this subgenre that certain manipulations are allowed. Not, for example, this is not the case in photojournalism, but this is also like in factual literature, or I mean, in non-fictional literature. If you are in journalism, there are going to be more strict standards for objectivity, whereas if I'm writing a letter to you, you know, it's you know, I can be more or less, I mean, I don't have to be so stick to the facts. I can just imagine a bit here and there, but overall, I mean, I'm putting forward a factual content, right? So it depends on the context of production. I mean, in the case in selfies, we don't have to be super objective as in photojournalism, but there's some standard of objectivity. In fact, one reason to claim this is that when they are super manipulated, we criticize them. Like, look, I mean, you use too many filters. I mean, it's clear that it's not you. So you wouldn't say that in the case of Cindy Sherman. I mean, we wouldn't object to the Cindy Sherman picture. Like, you use too many filters. No, because it's obvious that she's presenting a fictional selfie, right? So I mean, so the point is that selfies in general tend to be so there are genres of photography that can be sometimes, for example, advertising. There can be advertising photography that it's clearly fictional, and other times it's not fictional, depending on how it's put forward, how it's presented. But overall, I think the selfies are as a subgenre of factual photography. That's what I would say. I don't know if that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paloma, for this very stunning talk. I'm not an expert, so I have a very general question. So can we have the non-fiction, in the case of documentary, or non-factual genre, as you characterize it, so in your account, in photography at all? I mean, so you always have the point of view, maybe it connects to Carola's question. So you always have the point of view of the author, which takes the peak, right? So which somehow decide whether to represent a scene in a certain way. So even though they aren't represented imaginary entities, and so maybe there is no post-production, but just because of the fact that there is a point of view doesn't undermine a little the idea that there is such a thing as the non-factual genre in photography.
Non-factual or factual? I mean,
Non-factual, factual, yeah, right. Non-factual.
Non-factual.
Yes.
So And you're saying that because there's perspective.
Yes,
What-
I mean, because then in the case of Walker's Evans case,
Mhm.
it seems that you see something objective, right?
Right.
Because you see two people, they're not staged,
Mhm.
but then the author decided
Right.
to eliminate some details.
Right. I mean, but so
Right.
you're talking about the factual genre.
The factual
Right.
genre.
Okay. Good. Yes. I
Yeah.
get it. Mhm.
So he decided
Mhm.
that because he had maybe some political view or
Mhm.
maybe a specific
Mhm.
idea what photography should do,
Mhm.
he wanted us to see that specific scene, but he omitted some particulars
Mhm. Sure.
of the scene. So I was wondering whether it exists at all,
Mhm.
this genre.
Yeah.
Uh,
So this is really interesting because with photography, some people think either that there cannot be fictional photography. I mean, or in my sense, non-factual photography,
yeah.
but not for for another reason. And some people who claim what you said, like there is no objective photography because you always have a perspective. You always will have a point of view. There is no you cannot possibly capture the world as it is. But I think so. So two things. First, this is a question, I mean, of opposing representations to reality, right? So no representation is never going to be, I mean, a representation is going to be a representation. You cannot possibly capture all the world as it is. A representation is always going to have a perspective. But a representation, I mean, so that's true. So can we have an objective representation? I would say that we can have more or less, but it's not going to be the pure reality. I mean, that's why we have a difference there between reality and representation. But if we accept that we can have representations that can capture more or less the world as it is, then the representational content, we can classify it as fictional or non-fictional, depending on how it is presented or depending on the categories. So can there be a factor? Well, it depends on the standards. I mean, can there be a letter or a book that really captures how the World War II actually occurred? Well, but it can be truthful. It cannot possibly be the World War II itself. I mean, there's going to be a perspective always, that there's going to be some interest guiding the author. But I would say that there are more or less objective representations, both in literature and also in photography. Of course, the less objective they are, the more problematic they could be. I mean, in the case that I presented of the image of the soldier with the man, I mean, in a sense, there's some objectivity there. That event happened, but it's going to be more objectable the more it departs from the real, right? So I would say that they can be. So there is factual photography, but they're more objective, and it's a question of degree of objectivity. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I don't see any other questions from the online people, so Fabrizio.
Okay, so very interesting talk in that question. So if I understand correctly, you said that fiction, non-fiction distinction has an active role because there's a systematic variation in the appreciation if people know whether that's staged or not. And you presented a case that is convincing, so in that case, our intuition is that we got different. I'm wondering whether this is systematics or maybe in other cases we got no variation at all, especially if the aesthetic appreciation is based on some low-level features of the pictures. And I mean, there's a colleague of mine that is a bit embarrassed by him sometimes. Viola.
I hope he's not
Going to explain this why. So he's making an experiment. So he's doing a behavioral experiment in which he presents. I mean, both of you already know something. So he presents sexual scenes to subjects, and he says to these subjects whether they are staged or not.
All right.
So first, I don't actually know if it's doing. Is it just?
We don't want to know.
No, exactly. So And then it presented deep fakes or not. So it
Right.
presented nude scenes or
Right.
men or women, and they asked to rate the appreciation. So the question is just to aesthetically appreciate the pictures. And then he random presented this piece. So it's not important if it's really staged or not.
Yes.
What is important is the answer of the
Mhm.
subjects. And then the intuition was that indeed we might find some differences. So because our intuition is that if it's staged, then the appreciation is a bit lower. Then it's not staged, it's real. The appreciation is higher. But then it happened that no difference at all. So I mean that's
So that was the result, that there was no
the
difference.
results are not significant.
Yeah.
So they are not statistically
Good.
significant. So that's
Mhm.
that's an obstacle. So I don't know if
Yes.
it's this study really.
Yeah, but imagine that
Is
it's the
able
case.
to
Yeah.
go over the Comitato di Bioethics.
Yes.
But it is so this is just to mention that maybe we got this intuition, but in that case, maybe the appreciation is driven by
Yes.
some low-level features.
Yes.
That, I mean, not. So I'm just wondering whether one case is enough for
Yes.
your claim that there's or you need some
Yeah.
sort of systematic differences in appreciation.
Great question. I mean, three things. The first thing is that notice that example, let's take that at face value. I mean, I don't imagine that that's the
Yeah,
case, notice that the example is the opposite. We don't know, the label under which these photographs are classified.
Subjects are knowing the label, so the label is not important because they are randomly oriented, so they know the label.
So, but they know which are staged and which are not. Okay.
Yeah, they are presented with the very same,
Okay.
very same stimuli are presented. For a group of subjects, they are presented. This is staged, and they are not staged,
Mhm.
and they are asked for the appreciation. And then for the other subjects are simply reversed. So the stimuli are the same, but this time the subjects are saying that this is staged, and the other not.
Okay.
Not staged.
Okay. Good.
And they do not found any significant difference in the appreciation in knowing that it's staged and knowing that it's not staged. So it's contrary to what?
Yeah, good. I mean, good. So in that case, this has to be the case always. I mean, in all photographs. Maybe not. Maybe in pornography, there is no fiction. The labels in pornography don't matter because what you appreciate in photography is what you go and appreciate, and for that matter, you don't care whether it's fictional or non-fictional. So that could be a reason that there for certain in the same way as in certain mediums the difference doesn't apply. You could say that it's in certain genres they don't apply either. That could be one thing. With regard, but you're right. I only presented an example. So why do we have to believe that this is the case in other cases in photography? Well, there are studies, again, that are more than one study, both in literature and film and in photography. So they showed people pictures of war, of what were the stimuli. Well, I don't know which were the stimuli. I can check them, but there are at least 3 examples that I quote in the longer paper. Where this makes a significant difference, and actually something very, very interesting is that people are actually more engaged with fictional photographs if they think that it's fictional. I mean, partly it's because when you're told that these are non-fictional, you become more critical for some reason. And so there are interesting things of how we react once that we're told that certain photographs. They tell you, like, for example, this photograph appeared in a newspaper, it was a case, blah, blah, blah. So people would say, like, well, that's probably the wrong thing. But if they tell you that this appeared in a film, that's how it's like, oh, how interesting. I mean, they become more relaxed. I mean, there are studies for that. Perhaps not for all the subgenres. It's true. I mean, why pornography? Well, because how you appreciate pornography, you don't. I mean, the point is that you don't have to think much. Yeah, and it's true. I mean, for that matter, it suffices that it's sufficiently realistic. So it works its way. So you don't care about anything else. But I mean, it's a good point. This doesn't have to be across the board. It might be just for certain kind of pictures. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for the talk. I was also thinking about this idea that contrast standard and standard features
should influence in some way aesthetic appreciation. I was wondering about those cases in which features that are contrast standards for non-factual photography or standard for fictional photography actually enhance the documentary value of a certain photograph or its capacity to convey the factual content. Things like post-production, light, staging. Think about pictures like from McCary, in which certain portraits from McCary, in which the staging, the background, all the things enhance the factual content of the picture, or even the arid picture that you showed us with the child and the broken glass. The fact that it's staged perhaps enhances the documentary value of it.
Yeah.
So in that case, in those cases, which seems to say, oh, this is a very good factual photography, precisely because it violates those
Yes.
pictures.
So I think that that's so the genre of fiction draws from what the Waltonian picture, and Walton is very clear that contrastandard features can work in two ways. So they are always surprising, right? I mean, something that doesn't happen in those kind of photographs, for example. But you can be surprised in the bad way or in the good way. So some contrastandard features are going to be perceived as something that enhances the genre because they are so unusual that if you don't, so either they exclude something from the category. In such case, you would say, well, this is something. There is something wrong going on here, as in the case of the soldier pointing, and you say like, it doesn't exclude it from the category, but it's just not acceptable. Or you can have it surprise you, or it's being salient, and you say, well, this is something that has never been done, but it's done in a way that it doesn't upset the viewer in a way, but it surprised you in a good way. So that's something standard for a contrastandard feature, and it can be surprising. Either like defying the expectations in the good way, or defying the expectations and for you to say, and you would be led to say, there's some defect going on here. But that's something that happens with contrastandard features. That's in the main theory, let's say. So the fact that just to clarify, the fact that there is a contrastandard feature, first doesn't have to exclude work from the category. It's just something that you don't normally find. So if if all the features that you see in a photograph are contrastandard for non-fiction, it's probably because it's not fiction. But if there is one contrastandard feature, it might be because it's effective, or it might be because there's something very novel. Yeah.
Alessandro.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paloma. I would like to read through the paper carefully in order to understand.
I know that it's too much.
I have two questions. One is maybe a follow-up of this question, and it came up to my mind just now. So cannot we say that in some cases at least, if something is if a feature is a standard or not a standard, is a matter of use. If you want to use this picture, this photograph as for giving information in a newspaper, for example, then you are making something which actually is contrastandard in respect to the realistic genre. Okay.
I think I'm not getting the.
It's a matter of use and not of ontology.
The matter of use?
A matter of use and not of ontology. If a picture is a realistic or a non-realistic, etc. Okay.
Yes.
This is the question. This is one question. So it is.
Sorry, it might be me that I'm just I'm not.
If it is a matter of use, a pragmatic.
Yes.
Instead of an ontology.
All right. Okay.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. It's a pragmatic.
Sorry, it was me.
And not an ontologic issue. This is the first question.
Yes.
The second question. Okay, we may say that in many artistic practices, the way an artistic content is produced, okay, impact on the artistic significance of the artwork, and maybe the perceivers, the onlookers, or the listeners are deceived, okay, because they think that what they perceive is produced in a way, but it's produced in another way, okay. And in photography, also this is important because in many standard, I mean, very, very important cases, Henri Cartier-Bresson, for example, okay, he thinks, I mean, he gives us the impression that what happens in the photograph, okay, was a chance event, but it was long prepared, okay, so in this case, cannot we say that the fictional content actually regard, the fictional aspect, sorry, regard the act of the photographer and only through the act also the content?
Yes, so regarding the first question, is it a pragmatic or an ontological issue? It's a pragmatic issue, definitely. I mean, the categories of fiction and non-fiction, as I said at the beginning, they don't capture like natural kinds or something ontological.
It depends on the practice.
Depends on the practice. They depend on the practice and how they are, how we appreciate works of photography or works of.
So if the practice changes, they can also change.
Yes, absolutely. That's one of the consequences. I mean, there can in 120 years, there can digital photography can disappear.
I mean, we cannot set this photograph in Afghanistan as factual in a certain kind of practice, a factual photograph, depending on what we accept as realistic.
Yeah, I mean, so for example, the practice of history writing in Greece, you could make up almost most of the content. So Stacey Penn has a very good example of who is Tacitus.
Annalis.
Right. I mean, it's a completely different. I mean, we wouldn't write history, right? I mean, that wouldn't be acceptable.
Okay.
But he's making up a lot of content. So the standard features are going to change. I don't know, but they can change, and then you have to revise the standard features, but not the theory. Remember that the theory is just
standard.
Yes. What is going to happen is how you fill up the standard standard features. So it's completely pragmatic. You have to see the practices and what are the standard features at certain point of history.
Okay.
I think that's a good thing of the theory. And the second thing, so one thing is how the content is presented, and I mean, as you say, like at first I don't know from the look of the things how they were made. I mean, if I see the picture of Los Angeles Times, and I don't know how it was made, I can, it might as well be true. I mean, that would have the spectator cannot know. But I mean, the distinction between fiction and non-fiction is not an epistemic distinction in that sense. That you cannot tell what the categories are just by looking. But if you learn that the Cartier-Bresson photograph was staged, it's kind of you're disappointed. Why? Well, because you're disappointed if it is a non-fiction, a factual work of photography. Why? If you think that it's a fiction, it's like you don't care. Staging is just a standard feature. So it's like why this would be problematic. Now, if you think if you're disappointed, which I think it's the normal reaction, like, oh, I thought this was.
We feel deceived.
Because we feel deceived because the photograph was presented as a factual work of photography. So if you learn that it was staged, it's like, well, this is a contrastandard feature in the bad sense. Like, I don't expect this to happen, and normally when this happens, it's bad. Even though you can recognize all things considered, that, well, the photograph is good, at least he did a good job staging, but you're disappointed, and you're disappointed precisely because it's a factual photograph. If it would be a fictional photograph, it's like whatever, staging is there. So yeah, thanks.
I haven't understood whether it was a follow-up on Elvira's question or was a different question.
No,
Anyway.
it is a follow-up on Elvira's question. No, but if you have a question, I can wait.
No, it's your turn anyway.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter whether it is a
Okay.
follow-up
So
or a
it's
second.
connected with the topic of perspective, and in particular with Elvira's question. And it has to do with the role of the photographer. Okay, in your account, as you just answered to Alessandro's question, what is relevant, and in Stacey France as well, what is absolutely relevant is the community of appreciators, okay? And that's why standard, contra standard, and variable are those characteristics of the work we need focus on. But what about what we could define unreliable photographers? I mean, in literature, we have so many good examples, and there are also some genres that are unreliable, I would say, quite by definition. Think about autobiographies, okay? We think that autobiographies should be true by definition, should be factual by definition, because, I mean, I am the best person to write my life, okay?
Yeah,
But this is false, okay? Absolutely false. Do you have such problems with photography as well, or not?
there would be, I mean, I think that I would like to think about, I mean, look, I mean, I think that Andrea's you, right?
Yeah.
So I think the selfies are unreliable narrators. I mean, are the more or less, that can be it. Like, I am presenting my own life and I'm being unreliable, but yet I'm presenting this as autobiographic. So it's a factual genre. You know, there are documentaries that are just, you know, just everything is wrong, as there are like non-fictional literature that everything is wrong just because it's badly researched, because they are trying to deceive us, but they are presented. I mean, why do you know that these are factual or non-fictional? Well, because there are a lot of standard features of the category. They are presented as being truthful, even if they aren't. You know, there's a presented as with a realistic style, presented as research, presented as, you know, this is me. So in that sense, because there are a lot of standard features of the category, you do have you can say it's factual content, but you know, the authors or the producers might be unreliable because they can be showing you something that it's not the case. But that's precisely why they are objectable, because they are being presented as factual. Can you have something that would be very interesting is unreliable narrators in fiction in photography. I mean, that would, I don't know how even to think about that, because so what happens with unreliable narration in fiction is that they develop, you normally find out that they are unreliable narrators after a lot of things happen and things turn out to be different from what the narrator was telling you about, right? And in photography, since you have, like, the story is very short, I don't know, I mean, it would be very interesting. I mean, there would be.
It depends. For instance, in Lolita, Undercover is unreliable. You know it from the first beginning, because it was in the asylum, jail, and it tells you, okay, I want to tell you my story.
Yes.
I mean, that's not the best beginning.
But I mean, in literature, absolutely. But you know it after in photography, perhaps in the Sherman's pictures. Are, or I mean, but they are on purpose. I mean, these are fictional photographs that are telling you something about this woman who is and who has a. But I mean, you have to imagine a lot of story into the photographic fiction, since it's just a shot and it's telling you a story in a shot. How you suggest first that she's presenting herself? Maybe, I mean, maybe there's something like that. I mean, she's presenting herself as a very secure woman, but you can see in the eye that she's not as self-confident as she appears to be. Maybe you can read all that into the content, and in that sense, it could be fictional photography with an unreliable narrator. I mean, that would be an excellent exercise for photographers. How do you suggest an unreliable narrator in a fictional photograph? Yeah.
Maybe in the case of selfie.
Yeah.
You can suggest the unreliable narrator because you just compare different selfies.
Yes.
In one you look like with a certain appearance, in another one you look with another one, and you start wondering whether.
Yes.
This
I
is,
mean,
this is,
in selfies, because they are factual photography, the unreliable narrator is very easy to see. But in fictional, I think it's more. Perhaps I mean, maybe I'm just not having the right imagination right now. But in factual photography, selfies are a great example. Because it's something similar to the autobiography. It's like I am presenting myself as this wonderful and super I don't know, glamorous person, but I'm not. Because you can see the other pictures and because you know me. Or I think that selfies are that's a good way to describe a selfie. It's a factual photograph with an unreliable narrator.
So I don't see other questions, so maybe it's my time to ask
Yes,
you.
go ahead.
I would have a lot of questions, but I will focus just on two of them. One other.
25.
Yeah, 25, just two. The first one is a clarificatory question, and I appreciate what you said at the very beginning, that the notion of fiction you are mobilized here has nothing to do with the issue of fictional reference. But then the example that at a certain point you gave, I can't remember against whom, either Kathleen Stock or Karen, can't remember, with Captain America and Spider-Man.
Yes.
I got it that you said that our intuition is that in that case, what we have is a fictional photography because what are involved are fictional characters. Would anything change if we either focused on the actors or the real people that in point of fact impersonate those characters, or we had an example of a sort of montage in which there were a real guy that was not there in the real scene that is put together in the scene? Suppose that you had, for instance, 2 days ago we had the Ukrainian president Zelensky, who came to Italy and met Pope Francis. And so we had this picture of the two guys shaking their hands. And suppose that we have, in that picture, there is also Putin that is put into the picture by looking at these two guys, rather perplexed. Would you say that in that case, that photo remains fictional, even though it includes, say, a real individual, or not? So this is my
Right.
question.
So there's a lot of things to say there. First, I mean, definitely, I mean, I did say that, you know, it's clearly the case that these photographs are fiction because there are fictional characters. I mean, I said that, but I mean, what I meant, I mean, it's just a shortcut, right? Okay. The reason why it's fictional photography is not because they're fictional characters. I mean, having fictional characters is a standard feature of fictional photography, but they are continued. I mean, these fictional characters are, you know, are reference to cinema and literature, right? So which is a standard feature of fiction. So it's not only that. I mean, it's not something that appeared. It's not a plant with a face of an alien strange thing. It's just they are fictional characters that you are used to seeing in cinema. So that's a super standard feature of the fictional category. If you had like a photo montage of like, I mean, I didn't bring it, but the picture of Hitler and Franco saying hi in Endaya, I mean, that's a factual photograph. Even if, I mean, they are two, but not because they depict real characters. It's because it's presented as being the case. Okay, can you have a fictional photograph entirely composed by real people? I think you can. I mean, Cindy Sherman's photograph are such case. It's Cindy Sherman, but she's impersonating someone else that you don't know who she is. But it's clear. I mean, you can read first. It's called film still. Then, you know, it's suggested that it continues with a genre of cinema because of the type of shots. And if you want to understand the picture, you have to see her not as Cindy Sherman, but Cindy Sherman as impersonating some other woman who is doing certain things. So, of course, it's more difficult to have a fictional photograph with real people, but it depends. I mean, it depends on how they are presented. Normally, I mean, for example, there's another example. I don't know if you saw the advertising campaign of Disney done by Annie Leibovitz. So Annie Leibovitz is a great photographer, and she does both fictional and non-fictional photographs. But these photographs were like actors playing themselves as themselves, and at the same time playing, I mean, in settings that are, remind you of Disney films. So you would have, for example, I don't know the name of the actors, but, you know, very famous actors that, you know, in a way you were asked to recognize these actors as the actors they are in the setting of Snow White, or in the setting of different Disney pictures. So they're the reference. I mean, even though they are actors and they are kind of impersonating someone, you are meant to recognize them as the person they are. But they are fictional because they are. I mean, the rest of the photograph is representing something about Disney stories. So there you have someone who is a real character playing themselves as real characters in a setting that suggests that it's a fictional photograph because it's, you know, continues with Disney films that you tend to associate with fiction. I would say that. But of course, I mean, given that depicting fictional characters is a standard feature, it kind of gives you the prompt that this might be fictional, but you have to read all the things into the picture.
I like your answer, for it precisely prompts me to my second question, which is, it seems to that from what you said, you seem to say something like that what makes the case that a photograph is fiction has to do with matters of attitude, which is the answer that I like, because I would apply to this case the make-believe theory as sort of revised version of the make-believe theory by Walton, which of course Walton didn't apply because Walton thought that photographs are just transparent pictures, so they are different kind of beasts, and fiction cannot be involved there. But if we forget this sort of idea from Walton, we might apply what Walton says with respect to literature to the case of photographs. And it seems that Walton is disposed to say that since he accepts, for instance, that there are historical novels, in historical novels, it turns out that at least many sentences are both really and fictionally true. Consider, for instance, War and Peace, right? In War and Peace, it is both a real truth that Napoleon occupied Russia, because this is what happened, but it's also something that belongs to War and Peace. So it is also fictionally true that Napoleon occupied Russia, along with the fact that Napoleon met Bolkonsky and other things that belong to the story. So in theory, it is possible to imagine that Walton would be disposed to say that a text that is full with real truth could also be taken as fiction, because it only depends on the attitude that you have towards certain senses. And I wonder whether this idea might be applied to photographs as well. Or one might say, well, look, but it's precisely the same story. That is, if you regard photographs with a certain attitude, you take them as either faithful or unfaithful representation of reality. But you might also take them in a completely different attitude, and then they turn out to be fictional. For me, that attitude is a sort of meta-representational attitude along the lines of Alan Leslie and other people, but this is completely irrelevant.
Yeah, so yes and no, in the sense, yes, the sense that that's going to be, I mean, the attitude is certainly one important standard feature. I mean, the fact that the content is meant to be imagined, even if it's real or not, I mean, that's a standard feature of fictional photography. Why I don't want to say that that's all the story that you have to tell? Well, because there are going to be photographs or books, for that matter, that's not going to be enough to settle the issue. For example, I mean, in the other way around, you have the photograph of the kid with the window. There you have an imagined story that belongs to a non-fictional work. So it's the other way around, right? So so there you need, I mean, you need not only the attitude, but you need to see, you know, to read other standard features of the category to settle the issue. So, you know, how it is presented to you it's not, it's one picture that's going to signal a category. And it's a very good signal. But there are other features that are going to tell you, I mean, is it presented as realistic? Is it presented, is it a factual content? I mean, you need more information. So the attitude is going to be super important and probably one of the most important things, but it's not going to settle the whole issue. That's why all the theories that follow Walton, I mean, all the fictional utterance theories have a lot of counterexample. Because there are other things that are needed, and you cannot put so many sufficient conditions, right? So you need like a cluster of things that are going to count, but that are not going to be sufficient, but there have to be enough. So yeah.
Well, one might say that the case that I have in mind, both for literature and for photographs, is definitely a case of a contra-standard case, because normally one assumes that paradigmatically what is fictional contains something that is not real, that is not the case, and so on and so forth. But still, one might say, well, even though it is a contra-standard example, still it is a genuine example. And if I try to see what is the difference, I don't see any other difference, any other decisive difference, but for the fact that the reaction of the spectators are involved are different. I give you a famous anecdotal example, which of course is fake because it's anecdotal, which has to do with the Lumiere case, right? So first scenario, we have spectators in the Lumiere cinema that see this snapshot of a locomotive approaching there, and they get out of the cinema scared and frightened and so on and so forth. Suppose that this story is true, which I'm rather skeptical, but let's pass. Second scenario, the same people, but people that are informed that that snapshot belongs to a cinema movie, to a fiction, and so on and so forth. Completely different reaction, even though the picture remains exactly the same. If it were realistic, it is realistic also in the second scenario, and so on and so forth. So it seems that in these cases, the only thing that differs is the attitude.
So those are the interesting. Can I show the presentation again, because I have a real example. The Jeff Wall.
It's just the.
Yes. It's going to take a bit long. That's the problem of. Yeah, because you're not going to remember. It's just one among many, but it's shown here. So this is not it. There's another Jeff Walls. So this picture. So this might as well, I mean, actually, so this is the case that you mentioned. I mean, this is a fictional photography, just because you know a lot of things of the content of production. But, you know, you could see this and say, well, you know, this might as well be, you know, a picture of someone in the streets, and it might be a street photography rather than. So why do we know it's fictional? I mean, we need to know, I mean, not because, first, well, yeah, it turns out that it's staged. It turns out, I mean, first, but also you have to see the other pictures, and it's, you know, and they are called, I mean, mimic, and, you know, all these things are going to give you clues, and they're significant, because, you know, even if the picture looks exactly the same, you cannot read the category from the image. The context of production is going to give you clues that are going to tell you. I mean, if this very same picture were, you know, a picture on the street, that would be like, you know, it wouldn't be a stage, so that would be odd for a fictional picture, even if it looked the same. If there were no other pictures in the series, then you would say, well, I mean, perhaps it's fiction because you want it to be, and perhaps it would be, but it would be more difficult to classify it there. I mean, or perhaps it wouldn't be understood. And I think that if like in any other work of art, if you don't manage your intentions to be fully understood, then, you know, there's something wrong with your production or something. But here, I mean, so it's not only the look of the picture, it's the information that you have about it. And in this case, I mean, it looks the same, but it's staged. It's called mimic. It belongs to a series of pictures that are aimed to depict social realistic films. So there are a lot of things that come out. I mean, once that you scratch the content of production, it gives you clues that tick different standard features of the category, right? Even if it looks the same, but there are all the things that count.
A little follow-up on that. So, so are you then saying that only experts can somehow say whether, they can be aware and saying whether picture is factive or non-factive? So experts of the field.
Right. Not necessarily. We are not experts. Just if I go to an exhibition of Jeff Wall, all these things are going to be on the wall. So and if not, it's just because the person doesn't want you to understand the picture, right? And that's another story. I don't know. But those things, it's not about experts. It's just, these are things that you can. It's like when you go to a film, people say, well, how do you know whether if it? Normally when you read, the critic, or before you go to a film, you know that it's fiction, right? This is something that it's available for all of us. The majority of the clues, not all of them. For example, the Cartier-Bresson, you need to scratch into that, and then you learn that it was staged, and you're like, oh, I'm disappointed. Certain things you're gonna find out afterwards about details of the content of production. Yeah, maybe you have to scratch a bit, but the majority of the things are things that are available for all appreciators.
Not sure whether any of these details can really manage to provide the distinction, because I can imagine scenarios in which there is a sort of unreliable photographer or somebody that wants to deceive the audience in some way, that prompts these factors to be considered. But maybe these factors were not present at all. For instance, suppose that I was inspired by the examples that Fabrizio was giving. Suppose that I look at a certain sexual scene and somebody looks at me with a certain, when I'm showing because I'm involved in the situation with a certain face, right? And then I feel ashamed and takes a picture of me. And of course, I feel ashamed of the fact that somebody took a picture of me looking this way. And I say, well, but this picture, I call it mimic, maybe, and I just want it's clear that it was staged because So all these things are completely fake, because in point of fact, it was just a way for me to adjust in the reactions, to deceive the people and so on. Actually, that is a very realistic photograph. It's a non-fiction photograph. Somebody took a picture of me in that particular embarrassing.
And you want to delete that, so you name it differently so that.
Right, exactly. I just try to.
There could be the opposite of the Cartier-Bresson example. Like, years passed until we knew that was staged, right? So for that matter, 30 years passed and we thought, what a great coincidence. And suddenly you find out that things are different. Well, yeah, it's a defective photograph, that's it. If you present it, perhaps here you can say the same. If you manage to make people to think that that's a fictional photograph, then you would have to say, oh no, my face was staged. I didn't react. But you're gonna have to say things like it was staged. It's called mimic. So you're gonna perhaps you can invent all of them, but people are gonna know that that it's fiction because you're gonna give them the wrong clues. It's gonna be wrong. And in 30 years, if they find out that, this really happened, well, they're going to say, well, this is a defective fictional photograph, something like that, I would say.
I have a finger on this because, in stories, the problem we usually have with unreliable narrators is that we do not know how to decide what is true in the story, okay? In Bret Easton Ellis' American Psycho, you do not know if actually Bateman did kill that man. You don't know because it said that he killed him, but then someone else came and told everybody that he had a dinner with that man. So you do not know. With photographs, if you are not there when things happen, how to decide. Think about, and this is connected with another problem you have not dealt with directly, but that maybe is important as well, which is the connection between the title and the photograph. Okay, think about a photograph where there is Paloma in Torino at the Museum of Cinema, and the title of the photograph is Paloma working in Torino with the Mumble group. No? And then, but I mean, how to understand that photograph? Okay, of course, the title is wrong for that very photograph because it's not the photograph of, not the pic of this place, but it is what will happen tomorrow, for instance, when you will be free. It could be considered as ironic, maybe, because you came here, you had a free time, and then in that free time you decided to visit the museum, but or it could be a way of maybe making people believe that it was not true that you came in Torino for a talk, that you came here just for holiday, and in fact you were to the museum, and so on and so forth. So maybe how to read a photo, how to watch the photograph, or what to understand, is somehow given by the title. Okay, because you have a sort of, I mean, the author gives you a way of understanding something from the photograph. So I mean,
yeah. So something I didn't. Maybe it was in the list that I don't know. But a standard feature of factual photographs is that there is coherence between the title and the content.
okay,
Right, and that's not in the case of fiction. It's not. For example, the photograph by Dave Wall is called Death Troop Talks Afghanistan, blah, 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 blah. And there's no coherence between the content and the title. That's a standard feature of fiction. So of course the title is going to help you to give you context, but it's also going to set expectations depending on the category in which the work is placed. Jeff Wall gave this title that suggests that it's a battle, that they are real soldiers. But the picture itself, I mean, it's giving you signals that it's just, I mean, a stage. So there's something odd going on there. I mean, so those things are so contrast standard in a way, but also standard of the category. The fact that there's once that you find out that the picture itself is staged and it's just not the Battle of Afghanistan, the incoherence between the title and the content is typical of non-factual photography. In the case of factual photography, there's typically coherence, and you would be surprised in the wrong way if you find out that Paloma in the Mumble seminar suddenly it's the museum, right? So it's like if I present you again the attitude, the perspective. If I present that to you in a newspaper, like if I presented in the newspaper of my university, Paloma giving her talk, and and suddenly that's not the talk. People are going, because it's the metacategorical feature of it being in a newspaper, it being presented as being believed. Then you would say, well, you are deceiving us because this is not the talk. But if it's just presented as a fictional work, it's like, well. Or a factual irony, it would be different, of course. I mean, but depending, the reaction you're going to have is going to depend on whether the incoherence between the title and the content is a standard feature, such as it is in factual photography, or if it's a standard feature, which is the case of fiction. Yeah.
Yes, we have 5 minutes more. Do you have a question?
Yeah, but
Okay.
no problem.
No.
Okay.
Right.
Nice. This is about the examples that you gave that carry and stock
Yeah.
theories or definitions overgenerates and cold fiction was not really
Yes.
fiction. I was wondering whether you have been a little bit unfair with them in the sense that, for example, in the Edward picture with the child under the broken behind the broken glass. Greg would probably say, well, in that case, you are invited to believe that there is a child behind a broken glass, And then you can draw inferences about the fact that the fragility of the child, given the tilting of the lap and so on. And also in the case of the dog, perhaps you're invited to not to believe that there is a human with the head of the dog, because that's part, after all, of you getting the ironic element of the picture. And if you take it to be really a human figure with the face of a dog, you're mistaking something which is intended to be non-fictional as fictional. So do you have any other examples of overgeneration?
Just to see this example, I mean, what this is, so we have the first condition. It's a program of affective intent. It's an invitation to imagine. So the first we see why the first is the case. You're invited actually to imagine that this is a broken child. I mean, is that or you don't? So I just want to see exactly what you're opposing.
I don't think so.
If it's that, or so you're not. So do you think we are not invited to
No.
believe?
We are invited to believe that there is.
Sorry, to imagine.
Yeah, we're not invited to imagine that there is a child. We're invited to believe that there is a child behind a broken glass, and then we can infer that these two things mean something about the fragility of the child. So there's no imagination going on here.
Well, I mean, of course you can say that, but I think that it's an imagine. The reason why I say it's an of course it's an inference, but it's an imaginary inference because that's not something that is. I mean, it's not the children that is broken. It's you because the window is broken. You're invited to imagine that he is broken as well. I think that no, I mean.
Probably you are invited to imagine that there is a child behind a broken glass, but not that the child is broken.
But then the picture doesn't make sense. I mean, then you don't. I mean, the point. I think the picture is powerful because it's not that there's a window broken and a child. It's because it coins. I mean, because it's suggesting that the child is broken and suggesting. I mean, you may say, well, suggesting is not imagining, but you cannot. I think that if you grant me that this is suggesting that, it's because I think you are being called to imagine that that's the case. Right. Imagine, just not believe, of course.
Right, yeah. Oh, perhaps we have like different we are calling imagining two different things here. Perhaps because you are invited to imagine that the child is broken in a very metaphorical, not literal sense. You're not imagining that particular human being is broken in a fact way. It's about fragility or psychological fragility or stuff like that, right? So yeah, perhaps.
I mean, this is a question of interpretation, and we could see whether people. I mean, I don't know. I mean, do I have more cases? I mean, I don't have them right now. Can I think them? I mean, I would have to look at them, but I'm sure they're. I mean, the thing is that in all of them, you would have to concede. I mean, we would have to agree on in the interpretation, of course. But I don't know. I mean, it's hard for me to understand this picture if I don't imagine that. Because I think that I don't know what people think.
Just in order to better understand the case,
yes.
Is it a case in which one prescribes to imagine something like a fake occlusion, in the sense that one is invited to imagine that what is broken is on the surface of the child and not on the surface of the window, which is it? It's just, I don't know whether you have this, there's a very nice photograph in which you see some football players, and it seems that one of the players has a very long arm that stretches behind a player that is in between the first player and the third player. This is what one is invited to imagine. And of course, it's a fake case of occlusion from point of fact that it is not that the first player has such a long arm, it's just that the picture is combined in such a way that it seems that, but in point of fact, it's simply that the second player.
But that's another case of that. Aren't you invited by this photograph to, I mean, to think that the guy has a long arm, even though you're not, and that's a case against a stock, that the photographer is not kind of suggesting that you believe that, but you're imagining that such is the case, right? And because you imagine that you are not led to believe that that's the case. So it's still, I mean, I would say that that's a nonfiction. And I think this is, I mean, it's similar to this. I mean, here it's clear that, I mean, by the way, something important about this photograph is that it's a reportage on the 1929 crisis. So that's why it's not coincidental that the child might be broken, because I mean, it's families that are broken by, so that's why it's not accidental. But here, I mean, the strictly factual thing is that I mean, the child is entire, like nothing happens to him, I mean, in the outside, and the window is broken. That's a factual content. But that's not, I mean, it's not fiction because of that. I mean, it's non-fiction because of the context in which it was produced, how it was presented. But I mean, the picture is powerful precisely because it has another content, which you have to imagine, because that's certainly not the case. And I mean, it's hard for me. Yeah, it's suggesting that content, but it's not suggesting. I mean, suggesting is too narrow in the sense that when you suggest something, you might put it forward as, perhaps this is the case. And the photographer is not telling you that. I mean, it's not the case. I mean, and you know that. I mean, the child is not bleeding, right? So it's suggesting in an imaginary way that you consider that it's metaphorical, and metaphors involve imagination, I would say. So that's why I think it's imagining. But yeah, I think I can't convince you if you can see it. Yeah. I don't know what people, I mean, do you imagine the content, or am I just forcing this? Yeah.
Yeah, normally the sort of examples that I have in mind that prompt to create a sort of funny effect. Which
Yeah,
is
like
not the case in
like
these examples. Yeah, so that they do, for instance, a very nice picture of our former president Romano Prodi,
Mhm.
who was in Brussels standing before the European flag.
Mhm.
But in point, so there is a flag that is behind him,
Mhm.
and you see just on the front Romano Prodi.
Mhm.
But it seems that Romano Prodi is a saint, that there's a halo
Right.
of stars going around him. And,
So, but
and this is a problem of fake occlusion again.
right, but I mean, yeah, but I think that's also a case. It's, well, in this case, it's not the second condition. So in this case, we have the first condition. So, I mean, you're invited to believe, bye, Alessandro, ciao, thanks for coming. You're invited to believe that Romano Prodi is a saint. Of course, the second condition is not true. If he's a saint, it's not accidentally true. But imagine that it's the Pope and it's presented to Catholics.
Right.
Right? But it's non-fictional. I mean, imagine the same picture, right? So you would have, so that's a case. The case of Romano Prodi, but with the Pope for Christians.
Okay.
So you're invited to imagine that he's a saint because it's suggested by the halo, and it's true because you're a Christian. It's not accidentally true. He's the Pope, so he's a saint. So there you have the conditions met, and it's not fiction.
Okay.
Yeah. Good. Thank you.
I give you the example.
Yes.
Okay, I think it's time to.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your
Thank you. Allora, guest. Tutto.
Bye, Andrea.
Ciao Andrea.
Thanks for.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao.